Thank you for joining us for another riveting episode of Behind Breaking Bond. This is more riveting than usual. Why, you ask? Because we have three guests joining us today. Stephanie, introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Morales, and I'm running for state representative for House District 138, which is in the Spring Branch all the way up to the Jersey Village area.
And you?
No, I'm not running for anything, so don't vote for me. But if you want, vote for me. It's Andy Kahn, and if you write my name, and it's Kahan, Crime Stopper.
He's running for dog catcher.
Yes.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
During our last episode of Behind Breaking Bond, we had Lacey Hull on. You're running against Lacey. Tell us why folks should vote for you.
So I ran for this seat originally in 22. And I actually ran for this seat after having visited some of the children that I represent in the Child Without Placements, the CWAP locations for CPS, and I felt that there was a need for change. So that's why I started running back in 22. I'm running again for this seat because we have a education funding problem in House District 138. It has both Spring Branch ISD and Cy-Fair ISD. And both of these school districts are having significant funding issues. We had 4 children that were run over walking to school in Cy-Fair ISD because of the lack of buses, because the buses were cut because of the funding issue. Now, we asked I specifically worked with Spring Branch ISD for the last legislative session. I was part of their finance advocacy team, and we begged for money from the state legislature, and we just didn't get it. And so now we are where we are. And these are one of the things that the people of the district really, really need, this funding for their public schools. And so that's why I'm running. Representative Hull has done pretty good things in the legislature, but a lot of those things are her own personal pet projects. And they're not things that the people of this district actually want or need her to do. And so while, yes, I have my own special pet projects that I would like,
sure.
I would put those on the back burner and put in the forefront the things that the people of this district really
Is
need.
that would that be your initial push, the school districts, that issue there?
Yes, absolutely.
Is that difficult? How do you go about going to the legislature and trying to get more funding for schools?
So right now, all of the school funding is tied to vouchers.
Yeah.
And I mean, my vision for Texas would be a Texas where every single child gets free lunch and free breakfast at school. Children that are well fed are also going to be more willing and apt to learn
Sure.
in the classrooms. I was an athlete in high school. I was in the band. So I'd also like to see the state legislature fully fund all fine arts and all extracurricular activities. Because since we are on a criminal show, when we have kids involved in all of these things, they're not out on the street committing crimes.
That's a good point. That's a good point. If you start early with young people and you kind of get them going down the right road, you don't have to worry about it later.
Correct.
What's the best thing about running for office?
Talking to people. I've talked to so many people who just feel like their vote just never mattered. They never thought about voting before. And they're just really energized. I feel like they really needed something to care about. And almost every single person I talk to cares about the fact that we've got kids walking to school. Or we've got, all of these. The legislature, to their credit, gave us some great safety mandates for the schools, but they didn't fund them. And so a lot of our school districts are having to choose between funding these unfunded mandates and complying with the law, or keeping that money somewhere else, like buses.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what a lot of people are excited to talk about.
In your real occupation, you're a defense attorney?
I do both.
Or both?
I do both criminal defense and family law.
Okay. So, obviously, at Crime Stoppers, I'm the victim's advocate. So, as a legislator, what would you do on, let's say, behalf of crime victims, for example?
One of the things that is supposed to happen, but that's not really happening, is crime victims being informed when a defendant is released on bond, or they're not being even told that there's a protective order in place or things like that. I'd like to pass some laws to ensure that these things are happening.
That would be good. That would be very good.
The big problem has always been with victims' rights. For example, there's a chapter in Texas Code of Criminal Procedure, Chapter 56, with victims. And one of the ways that I've always described that is your Miranda warnings. And we all know that from TV. You know,
Right.
if I
Yeah.
if I don't give you your Miranda warnings, what happens to the case?
Yeah, I mean,
Bye-bye.
You let
It
it
gets
go,
dismissed.
yeah.
But you, as a crime victim, what happens if I don't apprise you of your rights as a crime victim?
Absolutely nothing.
nothing.
You might get a shrug of the shoulder. You see
Right.
the difference? Defendants' rights, and rightfully so, are protected and codified in the U.S. Constitution, but still to this day, victims' rights are a mere courtesy.
Yeah.
So passing, I get it, but the problem that we have is implementing. So one of the things, and we ask everybody on here, is the issue, and it's been brought up like in the Nungary case, the Jocelyn. A lot of people were upset that there had to be a bond set.
Right.
There were a
Yes.
lot of people upset, and I was explaining them because that's the way the law is in the state of Texas. So we've tried now for several sessions to pass a constitutional amendment. And all the amendment will do would allow Texas voters to decide whether or not judges should have discretion. And that's a key word.
Discretion.
Discretion not to grant bond to defendants charged with certain violent crimes. Right now, the only offense that they can deny bond is if you're seeking the death penalty in a capital murder case.
Right.
So what would happen if you're elected and this bill comes before you?
I think that there's a lot of, I feel like a lot of people don't trust the public, right? And I think that bills like this, something so huge that we're going to essentially change our criminal justice system, we should let the people decide whether
Yeah.
this is what they want or
Sure.
not. I'd like to see that kind of bill be put towards voting for the people, like abortion rights be put to the people. Let the people tell us what they want.
Right. It should be up to the people. Stephanie, if folks want to know more about your candidacy, do you have a website? Where can they go?
I do. They can go to stephaniefortexas.com. Stephanie for Texas on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, or X, whatever we're calling it
Right,
nowadays.
right.
I don't know what we're
Who
calling
knows?
it. It changes daily.
Right.
So
Hey, Stephanie, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
thank you for having me.
You bet. Till next week.
Joining us now are two candidates for the 14th Court of Appeals. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Chad Bridges. I'm judge of the 458 District Court in Fort Bend County. I'm running for 14th Court of Appeals, Place 3.
And I'm former Judge Maritza Antu. I'm running for the 14th Court of Appeals, Place 5.
And I'm Andy Kahn. I'm running for nothing. So vote for me. Write me in. It's KAHAN, Crime Stoppers.
First, let's talk a little bit about your backgrounds. Chad, tell us
Sure.
about your background.
So later this month will make my 30th year as an attorney. I've been a judge for about 5 years. I spent the bulk of my time as a prosecutor. I did some corporate work for a very brief time. I'm board certified in criminal law. I used to be president of the Fort Bend County Crime Victims Response Team. I received an award for outstanding service to crime victims from them. It was the Carol Reese Award, who was very active in MAD out here in Harris County. I've been published by the Texas Center for the Judiciary. It was an article about having bond conditions listed in TCIC, and I've trained judges for Texas Council on Family Violence.
You have a big background in domestic violence, don't you?
So I was a family violence prosecutor back in the last millennium, working for Mr. Holmes at the Harris County DA's office. I was chief of the Family Violence Division at the Fort Bend County DA's office for about 15 years.
That's incredible. Maritza?
I've been a lawyer for 20 years. I'm originally from McAllen, Texas. I was appointed in 2021, did 13 years at the DA's office, became a defense attorney, got appointed in 21, and most of your listeners will remember me because I slashed the backlog in such a short amount of time.
That's right, you did.
And I made it look easy, and of course lost my election in 22. we saw a huge opportunity this election for the courts of appeals, the 1st and the 14th courts of appeals, and I decided to, bank on that effort from 2022 and sort of catapult that into 2024.
So why run for an appellate bench? Why?
Well, it's a 6-year term for starters. Second, it's sort of the firewall to lower courts' decisions. And having sat on the bench and seeing how some of these decisions are made and what it takes to make the right decision, to be on the other side of that, reviewing a record and reviewing the law, to me, I think I can make a big difference.
I think it's one of those races that, well, even judges in general, I think the average person, they go to the poll and they don't pay a lot of attention. When these are races that people really need to pay attention to, what things does the Court of Appeals do?
So they hear civil, criminal, family, probate, some juvenile, and they hear 90% of the appeals that come through the 10 counties that we serve. So if you think about that, only 10% of the appeals are heard by the highest court, the Court of Criminal Appeals or the Texas Supreme Court. Everything else is heard by intermediary courts, which, would be the 14th Court of Appeals where Chad and I would serve.
And basically, you're sort of reviewing everything, right? And you're making sure that all the T's were crossed and the I's were dotted, sort of thing?
It's an error correction court. Like Maritza was saying, the Supreme Court of Texas and the Court of Criminal Appeals, they have discretionary jurisdiction, so they only take a few cases over big issues. But if you're the average person who's caught up in a lawsuit and you think that your trial judge made a mistake, your last stop is going to be the 14th Court of Appeals for the 10-county area around Houston. And it's critical, I think, that we get those decisions right. It sets up a better justice system for all of us.
How do you handle 10 counties?
Yeah.
That's all, I mean,
Divide and conquer.
How does it work?
So,
Okay,
from the way that it works from the legal sense is every county clerk and every district clerk assigns it to one of the courts, and they kind of rotate back and forth between 1st and 14th. And they all find their way into downtown Houston from all stretches, all the way out from Colorado County and the ends of Chambers County into Houston. From the political side of it, make sure your tires are good.
Yeah.
Check the oil before you leave.
You have a lot of gas in your
Yeah.
car.
And a decision that you make, that would be sort of a precedence, right? I mean, then somebody later on could say, well, Judge Chad Bridges in his opinion wrote da-da-da-da-da, and right?
So it does have that effect because it's like a pyramid. Because there are a lot of cases at the bottom in the trial courts. It gets much smaller in the intermediate area, but it gets really small at the top.
Right.
And so the decisions that we make here may not be the biggest policy decisions, but they're the bulk of decisions for the average person who winds up in court, either as a business owner, as someone who's been hurt in a car wreck, or as someone who's been accused of a crime, or someone who's a victim of a crime. This is the last stop, so it's critical that we get it right.
Yeah, so the decision that you make in that particular case would affect, if it's a case dealing with bad used car salesmen, that's going to have kind of a ripple effect.
If it's a published opinion, yes,
Yeah.
and they cite to that, and it becomes the law for that 10 counties and how it affects. We've talked to people about it because the folks who are in, outlying counties like Austin County and Grimes County, they say, but this is all in Houston. But these judges on these courts of appeals are making decisions about what your local judges decide, and that's why it's so critical in all of these 10 counties.
So when all the people in 10 counties, they vote for this.
Yes.
Absolutely.
So not just Harris County.
No.
No.
So
10
you guys
counties.
have
How
been
do you
going
do
all
that
over.
as far as like getting the word? I mean, that's going to be a hard
Yeah.
race to campaign for.
So the 10 of us are very collegial, and we, just like Maritza said, and I'll let her expand on it, we divide and conquer. We cover as much territory as we can.
Yeah, and that's what we've done. There are 10 open seats held by incumbent Democrats, and we have decided that if we divide and conquer, where Chad would go to a Grimes event and I will go to a Harris event or a Fort Bend event, that most of us could cover most of the ground in those 10 counties, and it works.
Yeah.
And the reason there's 10 of us is we want to take the majority on both the 1st and the 14th Court of Appeals.
Is every case like actually heard before you, or is it you're looking at documents, or how does it work?
So there are no witness stands and there's no jury boxes in the Court of Appeals. What you're doing is reviewing records and
Right.
exhibits and documents from the trial courts, and occasionally, and maybe not often enough, they have the attorneys, the appellate attorneys, come in and talk about what they think is really important and why there was a mistake in this case.
So
It's
you'd
done
have
that way.
you would have some hearings.
We would have arguments.
Arguments, yeah.
Yes.
But not hearings. There are no witnesses. No one's. There are no jurors or any of that stuff. This is all error correction, reviewing trial court decisions to make sure that they did it the right way.
So then, does
Paper.
everybody have to decide that yes, this was an error in this case, or how does that work?
So every case that is heard by either the 1st or the 14th is assigned a panel of 3 justices, and it's random, and those 3 justices will, hear out if there's an oral argument, they'll hear the argument, and they'll get together and see what they think about the case. And then, of course, somebody will say, well, I am in favor of what the trial court judge did, and the other 2 might say, well, we are not, we are against that. And so then an opinion comes from that, and it rotates. So it's not always the same 3 justices on a panel.
Why is it 6 years? That's a pretty lengthy term. Why 6 years? Do you know?
I don't know. They do rotate how we run. So, there's 10 seats up now. There'll be, 4 seats up in 26.
Yeah.
But, these courts were majority of Republican justices until 2018.
So you have an open seat, right? You don't.
Right.
There's not an incumbent.
There's
judge,
not an
right?
incumbent. He lost it
So-
in a runoff.
So you have an open, and you're running against.
Her name is Velda Faulkner.
Right. Okay. So
When it
that's
comes to, when you look at it from a standpoint of Democrat and Republican, how does that come into play, would you say? I mean, a lot of times people look at again, you look at a judicial race and it's, well, does the name familiar, or somebody, they just vote. I mean,
Yeah.
there's not a lot of thought that goes into it. And obviously a lot of thought should go into it, right?
And there's no name ID. But
Right.
what I will say is, Chad has been on the bench for 5 years. He obviously runs as a Republican. I was on the bench for 2, and obviously I run as a Republican. And we have records that people can look at. And, the way we distinguish ourselves is we talk about our records, we talk about our efficiency, we talk about listening to public safety and the safety of the community, the safety of police officers. We just have different values. And if you look at our records, you would see that we want to bring that same level of efficiency to the courts of appeals. Chad has a really interesting case that's been pending for a really long time in the Court of Appeals.
That's true. It was a case that I tried as a trial judge back in 2017, and it is still pending in the 14th Court of Appeals. It went to Austin, came back unanimously saying this is what you need to do, and it's been sitting there for about 18 months to 2 years. It was an aggravated robbery that happened at the Kentucky Fried Chicken in Stafford, and that
was that one of your motivating factors for running, or
it concerned me. That is, in my opinion, too long to
How
have
does
justice
that
come out.
work? I mean, obviously you wouldn't want to be under a time constraint. But
Sure.
then can you take as long as you want to, or how does that work?
So there are time constraints because there's different kinds of appeals, and some of them have to be done very fast, and some of them don't. But all of them should lead to some sort of reasonable amount of time to get closure.
Yeah.
Because when cases pin too long in trial courts or in the appellate court, they call it appellate orbit. There's even a term for it. The only people who win at that point are the lawyers.
Right.
And so people need to get on with their lives. If there's someone who's accused of a crime, if they're a victim of a crime, or if this is your business that's being shut down because of some ruling in a trial court, you need to be able to move on with your lives in a reasonably appropriate amount of time. And our people have talked about the fact that from 2017, when the jury rendered its verdict, until now, is not the expectation we should have.
Right. I mean, it's interesting too that you all look at everything. You're looking at criminal stuff. You're looking at civil litigation.
It
I mean,
is. It's a big deal.
Yeah.
These
Yeah.
seats are a really big deal, and they matter. And, you know, nobody has ever said that efficient courts are bad for anybody. I think you and Andy have brought a lot of attention to the fact that efficiency at the district court level helps everybody.
Yeah.
And it's a good thing for this. In our courts, people should be able to rely on precedent that follows the law. People should rely on the fact that we are experienced and qualified and that we are efficient.
What's
And
what's the biggest thing you learned while you were on the bench in Harris County? Would you say?
you know, I learned that doing my job and having the experience and getting on the bench and doing the hard work, which is holding lawyers' feet to the fire, it you know, it made me look like a rock star, but in reality, I was just doing the job that I was appointed to do.
I remember you talking before when you were on Behind Breaking Bond about that. It's like you have to sort of reel everybody in and do, hey, we're not going to keep resetting this. Right. We're not going to drag this on for months.
Right.
We're going to do it and we're going to get it done. And that works for everybody.
It does.
That works for the victim. That works for the defendant. I mean, if I'm a defendant, I don't want some criminal charge hanging over my head for years before it's
right.
adjudicated.
And that works for the taxpayers.
Exactly.
Look, the taxpayers pay court-appointed fees. When you have a case that languishes for 5-6 years, you're paying $200,000 versus a case that is tried in a year, you're paying $50,000.
Yeah.
That benefits everybody.
This is one of the factors of an overcrowding jail is you got to send people.
Exactly.
You got to send people all
Exactly.
over the place because these
Exactly.
cases aren't being tried quick enough. Yeah.
Right.
And you know, we have seen, you know, we had Harvey and we had a pandemic. I mean, there's definitely justifiable reasons for delays, but it's like, okay, now it's time to get back
So
on track.
if the both of you are elected, what happens? Walk us through. So you're elected, now what?
So a couple of things. One is we both have things that we do as judges and attorneys, and we have to leave our situations taken care of for the people who are coming behind us. But next thing is get in there and start to work. Start the communication that needs to happen between the judges, between the briefing attorneys and the staff attorneys to get things moving in the right direction. The ideal is ready day one. And
Hit the ground running.
And that's
Yep.
what we're aiming for, and I think we have the talent and the
So you have a
capability to do
short
that.
learning curve, basically, if that.
Sometimes, yeah. My situation's a little bit different. My court, unlike most of the ones in Harris County, is dual jurisdiction. It's a general jurisdiction court where I hear civil and criminal cases.
You're used to that.
So I'm used to that. But bottom line is, just like Maritza said, how hard will you grind to get it right for the people that you serve?
Right. If the people want to find out more about you and your race, what do they do?
They can go to bridgesforjustice.com and see about my background, find a great commercial that has all my family in it.
Maritza?
And it is a good one. They can either go to MaritzaAntu.com or VoteGOPJudges.com.
And of course, there are other candidates. Be sure to check out.
Yeah,
You
let
can
me
go
just
online.
for matter of brevity right here. So
Please.
the person you're running against is Velda Faulkner, right?
Yes.
And just to let everybody know, if you want to look at her website, it's veldaforjustice.com. And you're running against an incumbent judge,
Yep.
right? And that is Justice Borleo. Borleo.
Yes.
I know I was going to butcher
Francis
that name.
Borleo.
Right over there. You can find her at francisborleo.com as well.
Excellent. Just be sure to go out and vote. This is an important election, and some people, it's so much more than the president, right? I mean, we're not.
Elections matter so
Right,
much
right.
more.
We-
It drives
we are
me
not
nuts.
One of the battleground states. So I mean, come on. I mean, Texas is not going to impact the presidential run. It's not. But there's so many important races to go out there and vote. It's a power. It's a privilege. Be sure to use it. Hey, thank you for watching, and be kind to yourself and everyone else.
Happy Halloween.
Bye.